From the moment we can speak, we are taught to be good. Good boys don't talk back. Good girls don't fight. Be polite. Be nice. Share your toys. Smile even when it hurts. In school, we're rewarded not for courage or curiosity but for compliance, for sitting still, raising our hand, and memorizing what we're told. The good children become the quiet ones, the agreeable ones, the obedient ones. Stories reinforce it. Fairy tales, cartoons, and children's books wrap the idea in layers of sugar and gold. The hero is selfless. The villain is selfish. The hero sacrifices. The villain takes what he wants. The message is clear. Goodness is about giving, not getting. Yielding, not standing tall. But buried beneath these stories, something festers. Because the real world doesn't work that way. The playground doesn't reward kindness, it rewards confidence. Boardrooms don't bow to virtue, they respond to power. Relationships aren't held together by goodness alone, they're shaped by boundaries, dominance, and desire. So what happens to those who play by the rules? What happens to those who internalize the lessons of goodness, only to be crushed by a world that respects something else entirely? They break, quietly, silently, beneath the weight of invisible expectations. They overextend, always helping, always pleasing, hoping that being good will earn them love. It doesn't. They remain loyal to people who manipulate them because leaving would feel wrong. They silence their anger, their ambition, their darkness until it rots inside them. Because somewhere along the line, they were told that being good means being harmless. And being harmless means being small. It's easy to see goodness as an absolute virtue, something pure, something moral. But history doesn't share that view, nor does psychology, nor, most disturbingly, does reality. What if goodness is not universal? What if being good is not about morality, but about control, a framework designed to tame your instinct, shape your behavior, and rob you of power, all while convincing you it's for your own good? And what if this entire system of moral expectations, social pressure, and guilt isn't just a glitch in the matrix? What if it is the matrix? Enter Niccolo Machiavelli, a man who dared to say what others only whispered, that the world isn't ruled by virtue, that politics isn't a game of ideals but of power, that people aren't moved by what's good, but by what works. Machiavelli didn't believe in the fairy tale. He believed in the undercurrent, the hidden hand, the manipulation behind the mask. He saw goodness not as a strength but as a weakness, easily exploited by those who understood the game. And if you look closely, you'll see the same patterns today. You'll see how morality is wielded like a weapon, how righteousness is manufactured, how good people are used while the cunning rise. This is not a call to abandon decency. It's a call to question it, to examine what being good really means, to ask who benefits from your obedience, because the truth is uncomfortable. The more you seek to be good in the eyes of others, the easier it becomes to control you. So maybe the question isn't whether being good is right or wrong. Maybe the real question is, what is the hidden cost of being good, and who's making you pay it? Goodness is often spoken of as if it descended from the heavens, an eternal, unquestionable light guiding human beings toward truth, peace, and virtue. But when we trace the origins of goodness as a concept, we don't find something divine. We find something designed. It begins not with love, but with power. In ancient times, before institutions had the tools of mass communication or surveillance, how did rulers keep their people in line? Through force, sometimes. But brute strength is expensive. Fear has its limits. Fear breeds revolt. So they needed something subtler, something more sustainable. They needed to control not just people's actions, but their beliefs. Enter morality, not as a spontaneous moral awakening, but as a constructed system of framework designed to define what is right and what is wrong in ways that preserved order, protected hierarchy, and punished deviation. And the most dangerous ideas, they weren't the violent ones, they were the independent ones, the ones that questioned, resisted, or dared to say no. These ideas had to be made immoral. Friedrich Nietzsche called it slave morality, a moral system not born from strength, but from weakness, from resentment. In his eyes, early Christianity didn't emerge as a beacon of spiritual liberation. It emerged as a rebellion not of the powerful, but of the powerless, the poor, the sick, the outcast, those who had no material advantage redefined virtue to suit their position. They could not win by force, so they declared force to be evil. They could not rise in the hierarchy, so they called humility a virtue. They could not indulge desire, so they labeled it sin. They could not dominate, so they made submission sacred. In doing so, Nietzsche argued, they rewrote the moral code to reflect their suffering as goodness. And by doing so, they shackled future generations to the same limitations. The lion, he said, does not ask for permission, but the herd demands that the lion become a sheep, and if it refuses, it is branded evil. Michel Foucault took it even further. To him, morality was not only a set of rules but a mechanism of surveillance, a subtle, internalized police force, one that did not require whips or chains, because it lived in the mind of the individual. He described a world where people regulate themselves not out of logic or ethics but out of fear of being labeled bad, wrong, or immoral. This internal control is more effective than external punishment, because when you can convince someone that their desire to resist is itself immoral, they will suppress it voluntarily. Think of organized religion not in terms of belief, but in terms of control, the promise of heaven, the threat of hell, the regulation of behavior, the emphasis on confession, shame, repentance. These aren't just spiritual mechanisms. They are political tools. When morality is dictated from above, it becomes an invisible cage, one that trains people to discipline themselves. And this didn't end in the Middle Ages. Even during the Enlightenment, an age praised for liberating thought, morality was still shaped by those in power. New secular values emerged, but they served the same function: to create norms, to define deviance, to punish disobedience. The Industrial Revolution brought a new morality, the morality of productivity, of work ethic, of disciplined laziness. Was no longer just inefficient, it was immoral. Questioning your employer, dangerous. Nonconformity, pathological. And today, we live in a world that sells morality as a brand. Corporations use wokeness as a marketing strategy. Politicians weaponize morality to silence dissent. Social media rewards outrage masquerading as virtue. Public shaming is seen as justice. Being good is no longer about integrity, it's about optics. And when the appearance of morality becomes more important than its substance, truth collapses under the weight of performance. Goodness becomes a commodity. And like all commodities, it can be manipulated, bought, and sold. But there's a darker layer still, because those who do not conform to the dominant moral narrative are not just seen as wrong, they are seen as dangerous, as threats to the social fabric, as villains in a story written by those who benefit from obedience. And what is the cost of this? The quiet ones, the kind ones, those who follow the rules, suppress their instincts, and seek only to be good are slowly broken. Their authenticity is eroded. Their self-worth is tied to external approval. Their lives are ruled by guilt because they were taught that their natural desires, assertiveness, anger, self-interest are sinful. But the Machiavellian truth is this: morality, as it's taught, is often not about justice. It's about utility. And those who understand this, those who learn to navigate the narrative without being enslaved by it, gain power. They are not necessarily immoral, but they are not naive. They see that being good in the conventional sense is not a universal virtue but a role, one that can be played, exploited, or rejected. And once you see it too, you can begin to ask the real question: who benefits when I feel guilty? Who profits from my silence? Who gains when I sacrifice my truth for their approval? Because the history of goodness is not the history of virtue. It is the history of control, of moral frameworks built by the powerful to keep the masses compliant. And the sooner we realize this, the sooner we can reclaim morality not as a leash, but as a choice, not as something imposed, but as something earned. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror, one that reflects not who others want us to be, but who we truly are. There are few names in history more polarizing than Niccolo Machiavelli. To some, he is the father of modern political science. To others, the patron saint of manipulation. But love him or hate him, one thing is certain: he told the truth most people are too afraid to say. In a world drunk on idealism, Machiavelli poured a bucket of cold, cruel water The prince's most famous and infamous work is not a manifesto of cruelty, but a mirror, a reflection of how power actually functions behind the veil of civility and ethics. While other philosophers debated about the good, the just, the noble, Machiavelli did something dangerous. He looked at the world not as it should be but as it is. He observed that rulers who clung to moral purity rarely lasted, that virtue, in the wrong moment, could be a death sentence, and that power is maintained not through goodness, but through control. In his words, it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Why does this line unsettle us? Because deep down, we sense its accuracy. We know that in our workplaces, in politics, even in personal relationships, it is often those who demand respect, not those who beg for kindness, who win. This is the essence of Machiavellian realism, not an endorsement of cruelty for cruelty's sake, but a sober admission that the world is not governed by fairy tales, that those who wish to lead or survive must understand that morality, though valuable, is a tool, and like all tools, it must be wielded wisely or not at all. In The Prince, Machiavelli dismantles the illusions of virtue. He writes that a ruler must learn how not to be good when the situation demands it. That deception, if it preserves power and stability, is not only justified, it is necessary. These words cut deep into the modern psyche. We're raised to believe that authenticity is sacred, that truth always prevails, that justice is blind. But reality contradicts this at every turn. Good people lose. Honest people are crushed. The naive are devoured. So, what makes Machiavelli so dangerous isn't his cynicism, it's his accuracy. He exposes what institutions try to hide, that politics is a stage, and behind the curtain is calculation, strategy, sometimes brutality. Think about the leaders who are remembered, not just remembered fondly, but remembered effectively. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Bismarck, they were not saints, they were tacticians, masters of optics, of timing, of necessary violence. And yet, we cling to the fantasy that virtue alone can lead nations, that goodness alone can defeat evil, that being nice will save us. Machiavelli didn't write to destroy hope. He wrote to replace illusion with clarity, to show that leadership is not about being loved, but being respected. And respect is often born in the shadow of fear, not hatred, but consequence, predictability, power. This does not mean becoming a tyrant. It means understanding that idealism without realism is suicide, that the world does not reward the most innocent, it rewards the most adaptable. He warned us against those who appear virtuous, but act corruptly, and those who are honest, but fail to defend themselves. He understood human nature not as a philosopher in an ivory tower, but as a man who had seen betrayal, war, and the chaos of Italian politics firsthand. He knew that people admire virtue, but follow strength, that they speak of justice, but respond to authority. And that in times of uncertainty, they will seek not the most moral leader, but the most capable one. This is not a call to abandon integrity. It is a call to stop pretending that integrity alone is enough. Modern audiences recoil from Machiavelli because he threatens their worldview. He reminds them that predators exist, that kindness is not currency in the game of power, that weakness, when mistaken for goodness, is a liability. But perhaps that's why we need him more than ever. In a culture obsessed with image, where leaders are praised for their charm but fail to deliver substance, Machiavelli asks the forbidden question: what actually works? What preserves stability, protects people, and prevents chaos, not in theory, but in practice? He offers no comfort, only clarity. And in a world full of false promises, clarity is revolutionary. So, when we hear it is better to be feared than loved, it's not an invitation to become cruel. It's a warning that if you must choose between being liked and being respected, choose the one that ensures your survival. Because love is fleeting, loyalty is conditional, but fear, when rightly calibrated, commands boundaries. Machiavelli's honesty isn't cruel, it's cold. But in that coldness, there is power, the power to see clearly, to act wisely, to stop hoping for a perfect world and start navigating the real one. And once we stop resisting this truth, we begin to understand the world not as a fantasy but as a chessboard, and those who understand the rules win. We live in an age obsessed with appearance. From politicians and photo ops to influencers posting filtered snapshots of compassion. The modern world is no longer ruled by kings or tyrants, it's ruled by performance. Not power in the traditional sense, but the illusion of morality, of virtue, of being good. But behind the curated smiles and public declarations of empathy, something else operates in silence, strategy. Behind every image of generosity, there is often a calculation. Behind every declaration of virtue, a motive. And behind every good person in the spotlight, a quiet hunger for control. This is the age of the modern Machiavellian. The Machiavellian of today doesn't wear a crown or carry a sword. They wear suits. They manage social media accounts. They write speeches not for meaning, but for effect. They've replaced the battlefield with the boardroom, and instead of brute force, they use psychology. In 1513, Machiavelli told us that the successful ruler must learn how to not be good. Today, the successful ruler has learned how to appear good while ruthlessly pursuing their goals in the background. The performance of virtue is more important than virtue itself. Look at the political world. Campaigns are not run on honesty. They're sculpted by focus groups, tested slogans, and advisors who know exactly what words trigger dopamine in the brain. Politicians cry on cue, speak of unity while engineering division, and present themselves as servants while manipulating systems in their favor. They don't lie outright. They omit, they reframe, they spin. And that, according to Machiavelli, is not evil. It's effective. The corporate world follows suit. CEOs issue public apologies wrapped in soft language. We take responsibility. We're learning. We care. These statements are designed not to express remorse, but to preserve market share. Behind the scenes, mass layoffs continue. Exploitation persists. But the brand remains clean because the illusion is intact. Social media, too, is a theater of simulated goodness. Influencers share images volunteering, crying at injustices, or promoting mental health only to sell products moments later. It's not that these acts are inherently fake. It's that they've become part of the marketing machine. Virtue has been commodified. Goodness in this age is content. We perform kindness because it's profitable. We showcase empathy because it garners followers. And we condemn others not out of moral courage, but because outrage is a currency in the attention economy. The psychologist Robert Hare, who studied psychopathy for decades, found that some of the most manipulative individuals are not violent criminals but executives, leaders, and influencers. High-functioning manipulators who know exactly how to charm, how to feign sincerity, how to use impression management to their advantage. They do not lack intelligence, they lack conscience, but they understand the rules of the game better than anyone. Psychologist Delroy Powell has identified a personality trait called the dark triad, a combination of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. What's fascinating is that people high in these traits often rise to positions of power. Why? Because they're not burdened by guilt, they do what works, and they're smart enough to mask their intent behind charisma. In evolutionary terms, this makes sense. The predator who blends and survives longer. The wolf in sheep's clothing is harder to detect and more likely to feed. This isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. The appearance of goodness has always been a tool of power. But now, it's industrialized. Take corporate wokeness. Companies issue public statements supporting social causes, pride flags during June hashtags, during protests, but behind closed doors. They donate to politicians who oppose the very causes they claim to support. It's not hypocrisy, it's optics. The real allegiance is to profit. Machiavelli warned that a ruler must learn the art of deception not because he admired dishonesty, but because he saw the alternative, extinction. A leader who wears their heart on their sleeve is not admired. They are targeted, used, discarded. In today's world, we reward those who know how to shape perception, those who can present an image of virtue while playing a deeper, often darker game beneath the surface. We say we want truth, but we reward packaging. We say we value honesty, but we're addicted to spectacle. So the real Machiavellians aren't hiding, they're just cloaked in righteousness. They know that in the modern world, image is power. That visibility is influence. That if you can control how you're perceived, you can do almost anything behind the curtain because no one will. Look, this doesn't mean everyone in power is corrupt, but it does mean that the system itself incentivizes those who can manipulate it best. The whistleblower rarely wins. The unpolished truth teller is rarely promoted. But the one who says the right things, smiles the right way, and knows when to pretend to care rises. We live in a theater of moral posturing, and if we're not aware of it, we'll confuse charisma for character and rhetoric for reality. Understanding this isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming conscious. We must ask not just what people say but why they say it. Not just what they show but what they hide. Because in the modern world, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who look evil. They're the ones who look good to good. The real game is not about being moral. It's about mastering perception. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Because behind every carefully crafted image is a motive. Behind every performance of goodness is a strategy. And behind the smiling face of modern power is the ghost of Machiavelli, reminding us, in a world ruled by illusion, the most important skill is knowing the difference between what is real and what is merely well packaged. There's a kind of person who walks through life quietly exhausted. Not because they've failed, not because they're weak, but because they're constantly trying to be good. They hold doors open, even when they're in a rush. They bite their tongue in arguments, even when they're right. They carry the weight of other people's expectations like invisible bricks, stacked on their back. They are the ones who apologize when they've done nothing wrong, who say yes when they want to scream no, who show up for everyone except themselves. Outwardly, they appear kind, considerate, admirable, but inside, something is eroding. We are told from the earliest moments of life that to be good is to be loved, that compliance is virtue, that sacrificing your needs is honorable. But what we're rarely told is the cost. Because the pursuit of goodness, when taken too far, becomes a prison, a quiet, psychological cage built not from cruelty but from expectation. Carl Jung warned of this long ago. He called it the shadow, the part of ourselves that we deny, repress, and bury deep in the unconscious, the aggression we refuse to express, the selfishness we suppress, the resentment we won't admit. All in the name of being good. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits. It festers. And for many, it eventually leaks out not through grand explosions of anger, but through the subtle sabotage of the soul, passive aggression, chronic fatigue, emotional numbness, depression that defies explanation. These are the symptoms of someone at war with their own nature. The tragedy is not that they are bad. The tragedy is that they were never allowed to be whole. To be good, in the modern world, often means to be agreeable, but agreeableness comes with a shadow. The inability to say no, the constant fear of letting someone down, the habit of molding yourself to fit the room until you forget what shape you even were to begin with. People pleasers don't just fear conflict, they fear abandonment. Deep down, many believe that love is conditional, that if they stop being useful, they'll be discarded. So they serve and serve and serve until they disappear. Psychologist Gabor Mate speaks of toxic altruism, the compulsive drive to help others at the expense of your own health. It looks noble from the outside, but inside, it's driven by a trauma response, a belief that your worth is tied to your self-sacrifice. This pattern starts early. A child grows up in a household where love is given only when they behave. They learn to smile when they're sad, to be quiet when they're angry, to perform, to please, to parent their own parents. And that child grows into an adult who can't stop saving others even when it's killing them. They become the caretaker, the fixer, the emotional sponge, but never the priority. Over time, the exhaustion sets in, and with it, guilt. Because when they do try to take care of themselves, when they say no, set a boundary, or show anger, they feel like they're doing something wrong. This is the psychological burden of goodness, not just the weight of serving others, but the shame of serving yourself. Many people confuse this with morality, but true morality involves choice, sacrifice that is freely chosen, not compulsively enacted. When goodness becomes a compulsion, it stops being noble. It becomes pathology. And that's the secret few want to admit. Many good people are quietly suffering, not because they lack integrity, but because they were taught that integrity means self-erasure. This is where the shadow becomes dangerous. What is repressed doesn't die, it distorts. The kind person becomes resentful. The helper becomes manipulative. The moralist becomes judgmental. And the person who never learned to express healthy anger becomes toxic in their silence. We see this in failed relationships, where one partner claims to do everything right, yet carries a mountain of suppressed rage. In workplaces, where the quiet employee snaps after years of unacknowledged effort. In families, where the perfect child grows into an adult who silently hates their parents. Being good does not protect you from pain. Often it's the cause of it. And the irony is, the world doesn't reward you for it. The person who always says yes is not respected. They're used. The one who never speaks their truth isn't seen as virtuous. They're invisible. The martyr isn't crowned. They're forgotten. Because while society praises goodness, it secretly reveres power, confidence, boundaries, the ability to say no. So what's the alternative? It's not to become cruel. It's to become real. To reclaim the parts of yourself you were told to exile, to let your shadow breathe, not to act on every dark impulse, but to recognize it, to honor it, to understand that wholeness is more important than perfection. Carl Jung wrote, "I'd rather be whole than good." And in that sentence lies a profound truth. To be whole is to accept that you are both light and dark, kind and selfish, loving and angry, capable of compassion and confrontation. It means learning to set boundaries without guilt, to say no without apology, to choose yourself, not as an act of rebellion, but of survival. Because if your goodness is killing you, it's not goodness, it's conditioning, and you have the right to unlearn it, not by abandoning morality, but by anchoring it in authenticity. A good life is not one spent suppressing your truth. It's one lived with eyes open, with courage, with the willingness to be misunderstood. So to the quiet ones, the selfless ones, the ones breaking under the weight of always doing the right thing, you are not failing, you are awakening. And maybe, just maybe, the most moral act you can commit now is to stop being good and start being whole. It always begins with the best of intentions, a promise of safety, a cry for justice, a vision of a better world. And yet, history shows that some of the most horrific atrocities ever committed were justified not in the name of evil but in the name of good. Empires do not conquer with pride alone, they conquer with purpose. We bring civilization, they say. We bring democracy, we liberate. But behind these slogans lies an unsettling truth. Goodness, when dogmatized, becomes one of the most powerful weapons in existence. Because when you wrap an action in moral language, it becomes unchallengeable. When a cause is framed as righteous, dissent becomes heresy. And that's where the danger begins. George Orwell understood this perfectly. In his dystopian masterpiece 1984, he introduced us to a world where language itself is manipulated to control thought. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. These aren't just paradoxes, they are strategic distortions designed to make cruelty sound compassionate and domination feel noble. It's a tactic that real-world regimes have perfected over centuries. When governments go to war, they rarely admit to greed or strategic interest. They speak of liberating the oppressed, of defending human rights, of preserving peace. The bombs fall not because we are cruel but because we are kind. Noam Chomsky calls this manufactured consent, the process by which public support is cultivated for policies that, if stated honestly, would be morally indefensible. Through selective media coverage, emotional appeals, and moral panic, people are led to believe that violence is not only necessary but virtuous. And this dynamic doesn't only apply to geopolitics. Censorship is often framed as protection. We're shielding people from harm, they say. We're preserving social order. But who decides what's harmful? Who defines truth? The problem with moral righteousness is that it's often blind to itself. Once convinced of its own virtue, it stops asking questions, it stops listening, it stops doubting. And when doubt disappears, fanaticism takes its place. Hannah Arendt, the great political theorist, witnessed this firsthand during the rise of totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. She observed how ordinary people, neighbors, teachers, clerks became complicit in atrocities because they believed they were serving a higher good. It wasn't hatred that fueled the machine. It was obedience, order, morality. Arendt called it the banality of evil, the quiet, bureaucratic nightmare that emerges when moral language is used to sanitize violence. When the system says, "This is right," and the individual forgets to ask, "Is it?" This is the subtle horror of weaponized virtue. It doesn't feel evil. It feels justified. And that's what makes it so effective. In modern times, we see this dynamic play out in new forms. Social movements born from genuine injustice can, over time, become intolerant of nuance. What begins as a fight for dignity can devolve into purges of ideological impurity. A single wrong word, a single flawed opinion, and the mob descends not to debate, but to destroy. Call-out culture becomes moral theater. Performative outrage replaces critical thought. And suddenly, the line between activism and authoritarianism starts to blur. The philosopher John Stuart Mill warned of this over a century ago. He feared not just the tyranny of the government but the tyranny of the majority. A society where the loudest moral voice drowns out all others. Where the fear of being on the wrong side silences genuine inquiry. And in that silence, control takes root. We like to believe that morality is a safeguard. That as long as our cause is good, our actions are beyond reproach. But morality without reflection becomes dogma. And dogma is dangerous. Because it no longer listens, it no longer questions, it no longer sees the humanity in its enemies. It only seeks to win. The paradox is this: the more convinced we are of our goodness, the more capable we become of justifying cruelty. Because then, every action, no matter how extreme, can be reframed as necessary, as noble, as right. History is littered with the corpses of those sacrificed on the altar of righteousness. Religious crusades, political purges, cultural revolutions, each led by people who believed, with utter sincerity, that they were saving the world. They weren't monsters, they were missionaries. And that's what makes them so terrifying. So how do we protect ourselves from this descent? Not by rejecting morality but by humbling it. By remembering that goodness is not a fixed state, but a question we must constantly revisit. That no cause, no matter how noble, is immune to corruption. That power, when cloaked in virtue, becomes even more seductive. We must learn to distrust certainty. To resist the comfort of moral absolutism. To question not only the motives of others but our own. Because when goodness becomes unquestionable, it becomes unstoppable. And when it becomes unstoppable, it becomes dangerous. So the next time a leader tells you they're saving the world, the next time a movement demands purity at any cost, the next time a war is waged in the name of peace, ask yourself, who defines the good and who profits from your belief in it? There's a reason the world doesn't respect the overly nice. It's not because kindness is weak but because too often it's rooted in fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of rejection, fear of one's own power. We've been taught to be agreeable, to be humble, to be harmless. But harmlessness is not a virtue. It's a limitation. And worse, it's a lie, because beneath every compliant smile, beneath every no worries and it's fine, there simmers something far more ancient, far more real, a shadow, the part of us we were told to hide, the part that knows how to say no, how to fight, how to destroy. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of all the qualities we deny, suppress, and disown. It contains everything socially unacceptable: anger, desire, pride, even violence. And yet, Jung didn't believe the shadow should be eliminated. He believed it should be integrated. Because here's the paradox: to be truly moral, truly grounded, truly free, you must first be capable of doing the opposite. A good man who cannot do harm is not a good man. He is simply weak. Real goodness conscious. Deliberate goodness only emerges when you've looked into the abyss and chosen not to fall. When you could destroy, but don't. When you could lie, but tell the truth. When you could manipulate, but decide to remain authentic. Not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you've earned control over your own darkness. This is the integrated man, the one who has reclaimed the shadow, the one who is Dangerous but in the right way. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, makes it brutally clear, power is amoral. It doesn't care whether you're a nice person. It only recognizes leverage, confidence, presence, the capacity to act decisively. He writes of historical figures who learned this truth, men and women who, rather than disowning their inner darkness, learned to wield it with precision. Take Theodore Roosevelt. He was known for his charm, his eloquence, his commitment to progress. But underneath all that was an iron will. He once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Not don't carry a stick. Carry it. Know how to use it. But choose when. Nietzsche, too, warned against the illusion of passive virtue. And thus spoke Zarathustra. He scorns the meek who call themselves good simply because they lack the strength to be bad. You say your virtue is obedience, he writes, but a dog who obeys is not virtuous. Virtue, in Nietzsche's world, belongs to the one who transcends, the one who masters himself. And mastery always begins in the shadow, because in that, darkness lives not only danger but potential, the artist's rebellion, the entrepreneur's boldness, the dissident's fire, the warrior's calm in chaos. All of it flows from a single realization. I am not just who I pretend to be. We wear masks, polite, friendly, acceptable, but underneath, there is more. The man who swallows his anger becomes passive-aggressive. The woman who never sets boundaries becomes resentful. The person who avoids conflict lives in quiet despair. Repression doesn't make us moral. It makes us sick. Jung warned that what we do not face in ourselves will manifest in the world as fate. The violence you refuse to acknowledge becomes the violence you attract. The manipulation you deny becomes the manipulation you fall victim to. The shadow is not just an internal danger, it's a blind spot. And every blind spot is a vulnerability. So what does it mean to integrate the shadow? It doesn't mean becoming cruel. It doesn't mean indulging in power for its own sake. It means becoming whole. It means learning to say no with confidence. It means recognizing manipulation, not because you use it but because you've studied it. It means looking someone in the eye and knowing that you can walk away, demand better, draw the line. It means, in short, becoming dangerous. Not in the way that harms others but in the way that protects yourself, your time, your energy, your purpose. Think of someone truly powerful. They don't flinch. They don't apologize for existing. They don't need to raise their voice or prove their worth. Why? Because they've been to war with themselves and won. They don't hide their darkness. They control it. And that control is magnetic. In the modern world, the ability to assert your will, to maintain your boundaries, to resist manipulation is a superpower, especially when the culture rewards docility, especially when goodness has become a brand. You are not here to be a mascot for other people's expectations. You are here to become something real. Not perfect, not polished, but formidable. And that journey starts with asking, what parts of yourself have you disowned? Where do you go passive when you should go bold? Where have you confused being liked with being respected? To reclaim the shadow is to reclaim your life. To stop apologizing for your presence, to stop fearing your own strength, because until you know the darkest parts of yourself, you will always be ruled by them. You will sabotage relationships, careers, dreams without knowing why. But once you bring the darkness into the light, everything changes. You become harder to fool, harder to shake, harder to break. Not because you are cold, but because you are whole. And in a world that thrives on division, wholeness is the ultimate rebellion. So don't strive to be harmless, strive to be dangerous and disciplined. Not to dominate, but to protect. Not to control others, but to master yourself. And then when you choose to be kind, it will mean something, because it will be a choice, not a default. Not a performance, but a powerful declaration. I have faced the darkest in me, and I have decided to bring light. Goodness is not obedience. It is not submission to rules, nor passive conformity to the values of the time. It is not found in the unthinking repetition of moral slogans or in the social rituals of virtue signaling. True goodness is not inherited, it is earned. This is the paradox most never question, that morality, which should be a matter of choice, is treated as a matter of programming from birth. We are conditioned into moral scripts. Do this, don't do that, be kind, be polite, be agreeable. But when these rules are followed without understanding, they cease to be moral. They become mechanical. And machines are not good. They are merely obedient. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and the father of logotherapy, saw this distinction in the most brutal of conditions. In Auschwitz, where morality was annihilated by systemic cruelty, he observed that those who survived, with their humanity intact, were not necessarily the strongest or the smartest, but those who had meaning, a reason to live, a reason to choose, even in hell, how to respond. He famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, however, small is where morality lives. Not in what you do automatically, but in what you choose consciously." This is the difference between moral programming and moral agency. Moral programming is what you're taught. It's the inherited software of culture, religion, media, and authority. It simplifies complex choices into rigid formulas. It says, obey your parents, trust your leaders, be a good citizen, never offend. But moral agency is what you develop. It's the inner capacity to reflect, to doubt, to suffer through uncertainty and still choose what you believe is right, not what you've been told is right. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher of existential dread, called this the leap of faith, not faith in doctrine but faith in your ability to make meaning for yourself in a world that offers none. He rejected the crowd, the herd, the easy answers. He believed the individual must stand alone, face the abyss, and become responsible for who they are. Only then could one live authentically, and only authenticity, he believed, could lead to true moral clarity. In other words, goodness without freedom is not goodness at all. It's obedience masquerading as virtue. And that is exactly what institutions often want. A population that behaves correctly not because it understands morality, but because it fears punishment or craves approval. This is why genuine moral agency is dangerous to systems of control. A person who chooses goodness freely cannot be manipulated by guilt, cannot be coerced by shame, cannot be turned against themselves in the name of collective pressure, because they've built their own compass and they trust it. This is the moral core of Stoicism as well. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, believed that the highest good was to live in accordance with one's reasoned nature, not to please others, not to conform to expectation, but to align with truth, however inconvenient. He wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." But how do you know what is right? How do you know what is true? You don't at first. You wrestle. You struggle. You examine your instincts, your history, your assumptions. You unlearn the morality of fear, and you begin building the morality of strength. This is not the easy path. To be morally autonomous is to feel doubt, to make mistakes, to stand alone when the crowd howls for conformity. But it is also to possess something far rarer than goodness. Integrity. Integrity is not perfection. It's coherence when your values match your actions, not because someone is watching, but because you are, because you've taken the time to know what you believe and why. This is where moral agency surpasses moral programming. The programmed person might say the right things, do the socially accepted things, and still live in deep contradiction, because their actions aren't theirs. They are inherited, outsourced, unconscious. But the agent, the conscious actor, may offend, may rebel, may even fail in the eyes of others. But their actions are real. Their goodness, when it appears, is authentic. They help not for praise, but from principle. They speak the truth not for applause, but because they can't live with lies. They refuse the easy way not out of pride, but because it would cost them their soul. And that is the only kind of morality that matters. In a world obsessed with appearances, this kind of moral clarity is revolutionary. It cannot be faked, it cannot be bought, and it cannot be imposed. It must be chosen. So the question is no longer, am I being good? The question is, whose definition of good am I living by? And does it feel true to me? This is not an excuse to be selfish or cruel. It is an invitation to take responsibility. To stop hiding behind rules. To stop outsourcing your conscience, and to begin the painful, liberating work of becoming a moral agent in your own life. because only then can you act with both strength and compassion. Only then can you say no without guilt, and yes without fear. Only then do you stop being a puppet and start being a person. Not because someone told you to be good, but because you've looked into the dark, questioned everything, and still chosen to be. You were taught that goodness is everything. Be kind, be humble, be agreeable, keep your voice down, don't cause trouble, help others before yourself, and above all, don't be selfish. These weren't just moral lessons, they were programming, invisible threads that stitched themselves into your identity, until one day you stopped asking why. You stopped asking what it was costing you. And the cost is everything. When you spend your life trying to be good in the way others define it, you lose autonomy. You abandon your ability to decide what matters to you. Your actions no longer come from intention, but from obligation, from fear, from conditioning. You become a slave to perception, the good child who never complains, even when mistreated, the good student who follows the rules, even when the rules are broken, the good citizen who stays silent, even when the system lies. This is the hidden price of being nice. You trade your power for approval. You bury your anger to avoid rejection. You shrink your desires to make others comfortable, and in doing so, you give the world permission to walk over you, reshape you, and call it virtue. But this isn't a new phenomenon. History is filled with people who did the right thing for the wrong reasons and suffered for it. Entire generations were raised to obey without question. They didn't see it as weakness. They called it duty. They wore it like armor, but it didn't protect them. It turned them into tools for causes they didn't understand, for wars they didn't start, for ideologies they never questioned, because they were told, this is good, this is noble, this is who you should be. Meanwhile, those who understood the mechanics of obedience, the powerful, the cynical, the manipulators, they weaponized goodness. They sold illusions of morality while committing atrocities. They smiled while deceiving. They used people's goodness as leverage, turning their empathy into chains. That's the dark mirror. That behind every tyrant is a legion of the obedient. Not monsters, not sociopaths, but people who were taught that saying no makes you bad, that standing alone makes you arrogant, that asserting yourself makes you dangerous. And so they bowed, they conformed, they stayed nice, and they paid with their souls. But the damage doesn't only come from governments and ideologies. It plays out in ordinary lives and toxic relationships, abusive workplaces, broken friendships, the person who gives endlessly and wonders why they feel empty, the one who avoids conflict and wonders why they feel invisible, the one who says yes to everything and wonders why they're exhausted, anxious, resentful. These aren't signs of moral failure. They're signs of moral entrapment. Signs that your version of goodness is no longer sustainable because it was never yours to begin with. You inherited it. And now it's time to question it. This is not a call to abandon morality. It's a call to reclaim it. Because real goodness, authentic, conscious, powerful goodness cannot exist without freedom. The freedom to say no. The freedom to think critically. The freedom to offend, to challenge, to disobey when obedience becomes complicity. If you want to be good, you must first be dangerous, not cruel, not reckless, but capable of standing alone, capable of seeing the lie behind the smile, capable of walking away from the comfort of conformity. Only then does your goodness mean something, because only then is it truly a choice. There's a reason people admire those who are unafraid to be disliked. It's not because they're rude, it's because they're real. They've stopped living for validation. They've stepped outside the script. That is the beginning of power. To live in a world that demands your submission and refuse. To see that being nice isn't the same as being good. To understand that sometimes the most moral thing you can do is to resist. The message, in the end, is simple. Stop being obedient. Start being honest. Don't let politeness become your prison. Don't let virtue become your leash. Because the world will not thank you for destroying yourself quietly. It will not reward you for being endlessly available, endlessly agreeable, endlessly nice. It will only take and take until there's nothing left of you but a mask of goodness worn by a person who forgot how to feel, how to fight, how to be free. You were not born to be good. You were born to become. And that journey, messy, painful, Defiance is the real moral path. So ask yourself, is your goodness still yours, or has it become your cage? Because in the end, the price you pay for staying nice is not just your time, your energy, your peace. It's your mind, your strength, your life. And the only way to stop paying that price is to wake up.